He had everything: money, status, a mansion, and a wife he worshipped. But when his humble, poor mother came to his doorstep in need, he slapped her in front of everyone. To please his wife, he chose shame over blood, pride over love. But life has a way of bringing the mighty to their knees. And what happened next? What happens when a man who has everything forgets the one who gave him everything? In a glittering penthouse overlooking Manhattan's skyline, Richard Langston, a billionaire tech mogul, stood in the middle of a lavish party. The room buzzed with champagne flutes clinking, laughter echoing, and the soft hum of a string quartet. His wife, Victoria, dazzling in a red gown, clung to his arm, her smile sharp as a blade. Across the room, an older woman in a faded cardigan stood quietly, her hands trembling as she clutched a small gift wrapped in plain paper. That woman was Eleanor, Richard's mother, who had raised him alone in a cramped Brooklyn apartment, scraping by on diner tips. Tonight, she'd come uninvited, hoping to see her son, the boy she'd sacrificed everything for. But when Richard's eyes met hers, something cold flickered in them. Victoria whispered something, her lips curling. In a moment that froze the room, Richard strode over, raised his hand, and slapped his mother across the face. The gift fell, the paper tearing. Gasps rippled through the crowd. What happened next? It was something no one could have seen coming. Penthouse was a world of glass and gold. Floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city like a painting. Fairy lights twinkled above, casting soft glows on the guests' designer suits and glittering dresses. Waiters glided through the crowd, offering caviar and truffle canapes, while a jazz singer's voice floated like silk. Eleanor stood out, like a smudge on a polished mirror. Her cardigan was threadbare, her shoes scuffed from years of walking to work. She'd taken 3 buses to get here, her heart pounding with hope. She hadn't seen Richard in years, not since he'd built his empire and stopped returning her calls. But tonight was his birthday, and she'd brought a gift. A small hand-stitched photo album of their old life together. Snapshots of him as a boy, laughing in her arms, eating her homemade pancakes. She'd spent weeks making it, her fingers aching from the needle. Now, standing in this glittering world, she felt small, but she smiled anyway. Maybe he'd remember her tonight. Maybe he'd see her. Richard, though, was a man transformed. At 42, he was all sharp angles and sharper ambition. His tailored suit hugged his frame, his watch glinting with diamonds. He'd built Langston Tech from nothing, a company that now rivaled the biggest names in Silicon Valley. Victoria, 10 years younger, was his perfect match. Logan, ruthless, her eyes always scanning for the next opportunity. She'd pushed him to cut ties with his past, to shed anything that didn't fit their new life. "You're a king now, Richard," she'd say, her voice low and commanding. Kings don't look back, and he hadn't. Not at the mother who'd worked double shifts to buy his first computer. Not at the neighborhood he'd sworn to leave behind. But Eleanor's presence tonight was a crack in that perfect facade. When Victoria spotted her, grip on Richard's arm tightened. "Who let her in?" she hissed. Richard's jaw clenched. He felt the eyes of his guest investors, celebrities, power players watching him. He couldn't afford to look weak. The slap wasn't planned. It was a flash of anger, a need to prove something. Eleanor's cheeks stung, her eyes watering. As she stumbled back, the photo album hit the floor, pages spilling open to reveal faded pictures of a boy and his mother at Coney Island, at Christmas, at a school play. The room went silent, the jazz singer faltering mid-note. Guests stared, some in shock, others in morbid fascination. Victoria's lips twitched into a satisfied smirk, but even she seemed surprised by the force of Richard's hand. Eleanor didn't cry out. She just looked at her son, her eyes searching his face for the boy she used to know. "Richard," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I just wanted to see you." He froze, his hands still raised, his chest tight with something he couldn't name. Was it shame, rage, or something deeper? Something he'd buried long ago. The guests waited, breathless, for what he'd do next. But what happened was beyond anyone's imagination. The silence in the penthouse was suffocating. Like the air itself held its breath. Eleanor's small frame trembled as she knelt to gather the scattered pages of the photo album. Her fingers brushing over a picture of Richard, gap-toothed and grinning, holding a cheap plastic trophy from a school science fair. The guests stood, frozen, their champagne flutes forgotten in their hands. Richard's face was a mask, but his eyes flickered with something, maybe regret, maybe fear. Victoria's smirk faded as she sensed the shift in the room, her manicured nails digging into her palm. The Manhattan skyline sparkled outside, indifferent to the drama unfolding within. The penthouse, with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, felt like a stage, and every eye was on Richard. What would he do? Would he apologize? Kick her out? The tension coiled tighter, and Eleanor's soft voice broke the spell. "I didn't mean to embarrass you, Richie," she said, using the nickname she hadn't spoken in decades. His jaw twitched. Nobody called him that anymore. Eleanor's life hadn't been easy. She'd raised Richard alone after his father walked out when he was 5. Back then, their Brooklyn apartment was a shoebox, walls thin enough to hear the neighbors' fights. She'd worked nights at a diner, pouring coffee for truckers, her feet aching but her smile steady. Every extra dollar went to Richard: books, a second-hand computer, a bus pass to a better school. She'd sewn his clothes when they tore, told him stories when he couldn't sleep, and cheered the loudest at his science fairs. "You're gonna change the world, Richie," she'd say, her eyes bright with belief. But when his tech startup took off, the calls stopped, the visits stopped. She'd see his face on magazine covers, always next to Victoria, always in a world she couldn't touch. Still, she kept every article, every photo, in a scrapbook by her bed. Tonight, she'd come because she missed him, because she thought, maybe, he missed her too. Richard's world was different now. Langston Tech's headquarters loomed over Silicon Valley, a glass fortress of innovation. He'd built apps that millions used, made deals that shaped industries. Victoria had been there from the start, her ambition matching his. She'd pushed him to think bigger, to leave behind the small people who held him back. "Your mother's a reminder of who you're not anymore," she'd said once, her voice sharp. He'd listened. He'd stopped inviting Eleanor to events, stopped answering her letters. But seeing her now, in her worn cardigan, clutching that pathetic gift, something stirred in him. Shame, guilt. He pushed it down. The guests were watching tech moguls, venture capitalists, people who mattered. He couldn't look soft. Not now. Victoria stepped closer, her perfume sharp and expensive. "Get her out, Richard," she whispered. "She doesn't belong here." His hand still stung from the slap, but his heart pounded harder. What was he supposed to do? The photo album lay open on the floor, a snapshot of Richard and Eleanor at a park, her arm around his skinny shoulders, both of them laughing. A guest, an older man with kind eyes, stepped forward, bending to help Eleanor pick up the pages. "Let me," he said softly, his voice cutting through the tension. Eleanor looked up, her eyes wet but grateful. Richard watched, his throat tight. The man handed her a photo, and she clutched it like it was treasure. The room felt smaller now, the glittering lights dimmer. Richard's mind raced. He could feel Victoria's stare, the weight of his empire, the expectations of everyone around him. But Eleanor's quiet strength, her refusal to crumble, was undoing him. He took a step toward her, then stopped. What was he about to do? Apologize, or make it worse? The answer was coming, and it would change everything. Richard's polished shoes scuffed the marble floor as he stood frozen, caught between his mother's trembling figure and the weight of every eye in the room. Eleanor clutched the photo the older guest had handed her, her fingers tracing the edges of a moment-long gone sunny day at the park. Richard's boyish grin wide as he held a kite. The penthouse, with its glittering chandeliers and clinking glasses, seemed to fade, the air thick with unspoken questions. Victoria's hand brushed his arm, her whisper sharp. "Richard, do something." But he couldn't move. His chest felt like it was cracking open. Memories flooding in Eleanor's late-night stories, her calloused hands fixing his broken toys, her proud tears at his high school graduation. The slap still echoed in his ears, a mistake he couldn't undo. The older man, now standing beside Eleanor, looked at Richard with quiet disapproval. "She's your mother," he said, his voice low but firm. The words hit like a punch. What had he done? The room waited, breathless. Guests shifted uncomfortably, their murmurs growing. A young waitress, her tray wobbling, stared wide-eyed, her own heart twisting. She knew what it was like to feel invisible. Richard's gaze locked on the photo album. Pages splayed open, exposing a life he'd buried. One picture showed him and Eleanor baking cookies, flour dusting their faces. Her laugh so clear he could almost hear it now. He hadn't laughed like that in years. Victoria's face tightened, her eyes darting between Richard and the crowd. She leaned in, her voice a hiss. "You're embarrassing us, Richard. Get her out." But something in him snapped. He stepped forward, past Victoria, toward Eleanor. The room held its breath. Was he going to apologize, or make it worse? Eleanor looked up, her eyes soft but steady, holding no anger, only love. That look, it broke him. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. The word felt foreign, heavy, like it had been locked away too long. He dropped to his knees beside her, his $1,000 suit crumpling. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The words spilled out, raw and desperate. Tears stung his eyes as he reached for her hand, the one still holding the photo. The guests gasped, some stepping closer, others whispering. Victoria's face paled, her perfect composure cracking. Eleanor's lips trembled, but she didn't pull away. "Richie," she whispered, her voice a lifeline. "You're still my boy." The older man nodded, a faint smile breaking through. Richard's shoulders shook as he picked up the album, his fingers brushing over a picture of them at his first coding competition. Her clapping so hard her hands were red. He'd forgotten that. Forgotten her. The moment stretched, fragile and electric. Richard stood, helping Eleanor to her feet, her small frame steady against his. He turned to the crowd, his voice shaky but clear. "This is my mother," he said. "She made me who I am. And I forgot that." The room was silent, but the air felt different now, warmer, softer. The waitress wiped her eyes. A tech mogul in the back nodded slowly, his own memories stirring. Victoria stood rigid, her arms crossed, but even she couldn't break the spell. Richard looked at Eleanor, really looked at her, and saw the woman who'd given him everything. What came next? It wasn't just an apology. It was a promise, one that would change their lives forever. Richard's words hung in the air, raw and real, like a confession no one expected. The penthouse, with its glittering lights and polished surfaces, felt smaller now, the distance between him and Eleanor shrinking with every heartbeat. He held her hand, her fingers frail but warm, and the photo album rested between them, its pages a quiet testament to a life they'd shared. Eleanor's eyes, still bright despite the years, glistened with tears she didn't let fall. "Richie," she said again, softer this time, like she was afraid the moment might break. The guests watched, some with hands over their mouths, others nodding as if they too remembered someone they'd left behind. The waitress, her tray now steady, smiled through her own tears, thinking of her own mum back home. Victoria stood frozen, her red gown a stark contrast to the softening mood, her arms still crossed but her eyes uncertain. Richard took a deep breath. He wasn't done yet. He turned to the crowd, his voice steadier now. "I've spent years building a company, chasing success, thinking it made me someone," he said. "But I forgot the only person who ever believed I could be anything at all." He looked at Eleanor, his throat tight. "My mom gave up everything for me, and I hurt her tonight. I can't undo that, but I can start over." He squeezed her hand, and she squeezed back, her grip stronger than he expected. The older man, who'd helped her earlier, clapped slowly, and soon others joined, a quiet ripple of applause that felt more like forgiveness than celebration. Richard knelt again, picking up the photo album. "This is my story," he said, holding it up. "Not the headlines, not the money. This." A guest, a woman in a sparkling dress, wiped her eyes. Another whispered, "That's beautiful." Richard stood, helping Eleanor to a nearby chair. He waved off a waiter offering champagne and asked for water instead, handing it to her with a gentleness he hadn't shown in years. "Mom, I want you to stay," he said. "Not just tonight. For good. I'm moving you out of that apartment. You're coming closer, where I can take care of you." Eleanor shook her head, her voice soft but firm. "I don't need fancy things, Richie. I just need you." Her words hit him harder than the slap ever could. He nodded, tears spilling now, unashamed. "You've got me," he whispered. "You always did." The crowd parted as he led her to the center of the room, where the jazz singer started a new song, something slow and soulful. Richard didn't care about the party anymore. He didn't care about Victoria's glare or the investors' whispers. He saw only his mom. Victoria stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply. "Richard, this is ridiculous," she said, her voice low but cutting. "You're making a scene." He turned to her, his eyes calm but resolute. "No, Victoria, I'm making things right." The room felt the shift, the power tilting away from her. She opened her mouth, then closed it, her face flushed. Richard ignored her, turning back to Eleanor. "Let's go home," he said. "Not here. Somewhere quiet. Just us." Eleanor smiled, a small radiant thing that lit up the room more than any chandelier. They walked toward the elevator, the photo album tucked under his arm, the guests parting like a sea. The waitress watched them go, her heart full. As the doors closed, Richard felt lighter than he had in years. He'd lost something tonight, his pride, his image, but he'd found his mom. And that was everything.